On a freezing night in the middle of a snowstorm, an old lady sat alone in her tiny diner, counting her last few dollars. She didn't know how she would keep the place open. She was tired, broke, and ready to give up. Then suddenly, the door swung open, and 15 bikers walked in, covered in snow, looking cold and serious. Most people would have panicked, but not her. She smiled, welcomed them, and began to cook. Little did she know what would happen. The next morning would change her life forever. Before we jump in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? On a brutally cold winter night, when the snow blanketed everything in sight and the highways looked more like frozen rivers than roads, a small diner sat glowing like a warm candle in the middle of a stormy nowhere. Its flickering neon sign reading Maggie's Place, barely visible through the swirling blizzard outside. And inside, the atmosphere was calm but lonely, with a few truckers sipping coffee, a couple of locals warming their hands on ceramic mugs, and behind the counter stood an old woman named Maggie Thompson, silver-haired, slightly hunched, but still moving with a kind of stubborn grace only time could teach. She was 72, a widow, and had been running the diner by herself since her husband passed 5 winters ago, never once closing the doors, not even on Christmas or during power outages. Believing that someone might always need a warm meal, especially when the world was at its coldest, she was the kind of soul who remembered names, knew who liked extra whipped cream, who just wanted silence, and who needed someone to pretend they weren't crying into their pie. But that night, as the snowstorm outside turned violent and the wind howled like wolves, something happened that would turn her quiet life upside down. At exactly 9:47 p.m., the door burst open, sending a gust of snow into the diner. And in stepped 2 men wearing heavy black leather jackets with patches that read Hell's Angels. They were massive, covered in tattoos, beards like wild animals, their boots muddy, their eyes sharp, and everyone in the diner froze, forks hovering midair, conversations dying instantly, the air thick with tension as more of them piled in behind. 3, then 5, then 10, until a total of 15 burly bikers had squeezed into the little diner, bringing with them a kind of presence that didn't belong in a sleepy town like this. Maggie looked up from the counter, her arthritic hands still drying a cup with a checkered towel, and though her heart jumped a little, she didn't flinch. "Take a seat, boys," she said gently. "Coffee's hot and pie's fresh, just baked it an hour ago." And her voice, though calm, had that don't mess with me edge that only grandmothers and drill sergeants naturally possess. And the bikers, confused but respectful, shuffled into booths, snow melting off their boots and forming puddles beneath their seats. One of them, a bearded giant named Diesel, leaned forward and said, "Ma'am, we don't want any trouble. We just got stuck on the interstate. Our bikes can't move in this mess, and the storm's killing visibility." To which Maggie simply replied, "Trouble only starts when folks forget how to act human. Now do you want the apple or the cherry pie?" And with that, something shifted in the room, a kind of invisible wall that had been up, slowly melting like the snow on their jackets. And soon Maggie was pouring coffee into chipped mugs, sliding plates of stew across the counter, warming up frozen fingers and cold hearts all in the same breath. And what began as a tense, uncertain moment turned into something surreal. Laughs echoed through the diner, stories were shared, and the truckers who had earlier gripped their forks like weapons now sat shoulder to shoulder with the bikers, passing ketchup and arguing over which pie was best. But the magic of that night wasn't just the warmth or the food. It was in Maggie herself. the way she looked each man in the eye, without fear or judgment. The way she called one of them sweetheart when she noticed his knuckles were bleeding from pushing a broken-down bike, or how she offered her late husband's coat to the youngest biker who was shivering silently in a corner, her motherly instincts refusing to be dulled by leather, tattoos, or size. Little did anyone know, this wasn't her first encounter with rough men. For Maggie had once run soup kitchens in Detroit during the worst of the riots, had stared down angry drunks in the back alley of her diner when it was new, and had watched her husband, a Vietnam vet, suffer nightmares so vivid they'd both wake up screaming. But she survived it all, with grit and kindness as her armor. And this night was no different. Around midnight, the power flickered and died completely, leaving the diner in darkness, but Maggie lit candles, pulled out a battery-powered radio, and brought out extra blankets she kept in the back. "Sometimes God doesn't send angels with wings," she whispered to one of the bikers as she handed him a warm quilt. "Sometimes he sends them with handlebars." And for a long moment, the big man just stared at her, eyes glistening with emotion he'd long forgotten how to show. The storm didn't let up till morning, but by the time the sun rose and the snowplows rumbled past, the entire diner looked like a different world. Coffee-stained napkins with scribbled jokes, plates stacked high, a few snores echoing from those who'd passed out in booths, and Maggie still in her apron, asleep in her chair, leaning back with a soft smile on her face. Before the bikers left, they cleaned up the entire place, leaving behind a handwritten note that said, "To the kindest soul on the road, thank you for sheltering us when no one else would. You didn't just feed us, you reminded us what family feels like." And tucked inside the envelope was a thick wad of cash, way more than the cost of food, and taped to it was a patch from their club, something they never gave lightly, with the words stitched in red: honor, loyalty, Maggie. Later that week, news of the event spread like wildfire. Someone had snapped a photo of Maggie smiling with the bikers, and it went viral. People across the country sending letters, donations, and even a local biker club offering free security for her diner from now on. Not that she asked for it. Reporters showed up, but Maggie just laughed and said, "I'm not a hero. I'm just a woman who believes nobody should be left out in the cold." And even though the story faded from the headlines, every winter after that, the bikers came back. Not as lost travelers, but as family, bringing gifts, helping fix up the diner, and once even escorting Maggie on her birthday ride down Main Street, engines roaring like thunder as the whole town stood outside, clapping and cheering for the little old lady who once fed 15 Hell's Angels during a blizzard. Not with fear, but with heart.